trending or performance data, that's a very powerful module in the DataMiner system because it gives you that history perspective while working with a parameter. On an issue, for instance, or on some configuration you're doing, you immediately see how that parameter evolved over time. So let's take a look at that. So the trending module consists out of the following. So first, we'll take a quick introduction, and then we'll talk a little bit about the trending data. How is that being stored? Because how much detail do we have there? And then we'll dive into the UI to take a closer look at the layouts, viewing the graphs, what kind of features do we have to know there, and adding also additional parameters, because I can have multiple parameters in the same graph to compare them together. Some of the right-click menu items are also interesting to take a closer look at to know all the features, and I can actually also combine those added parameters in there and put them into a trend group to easily save that and recall that later on. And then we'll have a quick look at the reports and the histogram, which is also accessible there, and wrap it up with some quick examples there. All right, so as I said, I'm very excited about this module because it is so valuable. It gives you that history perspective. Whenever there's a problem, you open up the trend graph, you know how you got there. If you have some congestion in your system, you take a look at the trend graph on where that is increasing or decreasing. Is it overnight? Is it a sudden increase? Has it started a longer time ago? So it really gives you valuable information. So that's a very popular interface in DataMiner. So you can access that by simply drilling down into a parameter. So if I drill down into my total processor load, we have already seen the details. We have that trend graph immediately available, showing me the by default last 24 hours. But it also has some histogram, some details, reports that we will take a closer look at. Now, before we dive into the UI, what is actually being stored on a DataMiner system? How much detail do we have there? What's the granularity? Well, first of all, you need to activate the trending on every single parameter you want to have it available for trending. That is because we don't want to overload the database with unnecessary information. So you can choose like, okay, a bitrate on a Cisco switch, that's important. I activate that. You can choose it to activate it for all your Cisco switches or for all the ports or subsets. So you do have all kinds of options available. That's something for administrator part. Here we're only going to look at the data. But I want to make you aware that it's a choice whether you activate the trending, yes or no. Next to that, we have actually two choices when activating the trending on a parameter. We have the real-time and we have the average. The real-time trending is typically a smaller window of 1 day, 2 days, or maybe up to a week, where you basically track all the changes that we detect on this parameter. So every single pulse cycle that we do, for instance, on a bitrate or on a CPU load might be a different value. And that will continuously go into the database, and we have every single detail that we know in the DataMiner system stored into that database. Since that can be quite a large amount of data, we do limit that typically to a couple of days. Next to that, we also have the average trending. The average trending allows you to have that over a longer period of time. By default, and I say by default because you can change that in the DataMiner system, by default, it will store for 1 month slices of 5 minutes. So for every 5 minutes, it will keep track of the average value. And next to the average value, actually also the minimum and the maximum that happened within that 5-minute time frame. So if it did a spike up and a spike down, and I have my average, you will also see that zone where it is actually moving in. I'll show you that in the UI as well. But for 1 month, I have a detail up to 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes, I still know the average and the min max what it did in that 5 minutes. But not more. Then if I go beyond 1 month in the past, you will go for 1 hour time slots. The 1 hour time slots are going up to 1 year. So by default, the DataMiner system will have 5-minute slices for 1 month and 1 hour slices for 1 year. You do have the possibility, although, to change the 5 minutes to maybe 10 minutes, change the 1 month to maybe 2 months, change the 1 hour to maybe 2 hours, and change the 1 year to maybe 2 years. So you do have the possibility to change those things. And on top of that, you can even add a third window. A third window, for instance, saying I want to go for 3 years or maybe 5 years with averages time slots of 24 hours. So every day, I still know the average, the minimum and the maximum within that day, but for maybe 5 years. So that third time slot can also be added. Now, that's something you can configure in the DataMiner system. You can see more information in the help, and that's more an administrative stuff. But I want to mention it here because if we go back in time and we zoom in, we will see less detail. 5-minute slots, 1 hour time slots. Now, taking a look at the UI. So when we drill down into a specific parameter, like in this case, the total processor load, we do see immediately the trend graph, of course, which is the most important thing. We also note the tab pages on top there with the details, the histogram, the templates. That's more administrative stuff. But the trending is by default activated or selected whenever there is trending available, like in this case. We do see also on the right-hand side, of the now line, that there is also a trend prediction available. I'll show you a little bit more about that. If that is running on a Cassandra system, that's only available with Cassandra, not with the legacy MySQL or SQL Server. And at the bottom, we do have the preview pane, allowing you to see not only, by default, it shows last 24 hours, not only what you're currently looking at, but also what is in front, happened before that. And you can easily use that to navigate in time as well. We'll use that when we do some navigation. Whenever I drill down into a parameter, by default, it will always show me the last 24 hours. And you do have on the upper right-hand side a convenient button to switch to the week to date or month to date, or go back to the last 24 hours whenever you were zooming in or zooming out or moving in time. You can always easily go back there. Also worth mentioning is that you have the possibility there to maximize again. So we have that available on tables and on a data display, etc. available as well. And if you click on there, it basically uses the full screen real estate of your DataMiner cube. And if you maximize your cube of your full monitor to show that trend graph, because you want to get all the detail out of that. So you want to leverage that maximize button there. And also interesting to note is that there is a green bar indicated here at the bottom of your trend graph. And that is actually when the actual alarms are happening. And I say the actual alarms, that information is coming out of the alarm database, because it is possible that a certain parameter spikes for a few seconds to 100% CPU utilization, for instance, but no alarm is being generated because we activated hysteresis. Then it would just remain green and it would not indicate that there is an alarm there. Only when it is in alarm above, let's say 90% for a minute, then the alarm is being generated. Then this bar will also show that there is a critical state of that parameter. Now, also interesting to note is that the trend graph, if you leave that open, it actually updates automatically. So let's already take a quick look at that. I'm connected to my DCP DMA, so dcpdma.skyline.be, and I'll just go to our DMA info, the Microsoft server monitoring the local machine. And I go to the data, and I do see that I have some parameters where there is monitoring available. So the total processor load, if I see it's stable, if I click on there or you double click on the name, you can drill down into that parameter and you can see how it evolved over the last 24 hours. So you see we were running quite high there, and then there was a drop, and currently we're running quite stable. Also, the prediction is showing me that it will expects to continue like that. So you can easily switch to week to date or month to date, or go back to week to date or last 24 hours. Let me check if I have any alarming in there. You will see maybe a little bit of dots there with some alarms. So the green bar is actually also indicating that some alarms happened over there as well. And I have another example of another Microsoft server here. Let's take a look at that one, where we also have the total processor loads. This one is changing a little bit different, and we can see some more alarms happening here because we had some higher spikes there. So if I zoom in on that part, you can clearly see that we had an alarm situation here because it was running too high according to my alarm settings. And it actually also went to some warning zone there. Now, I already showed you a little bit during the demo, but how do we zoom and how do we pan or move our graph in time? To zoom, you can simply use the scroll wheel on your mouse, or if you have a touchscreen, pan to zoom. You do also have the possibility to select and actually select a region of your trend graph. So just by, I'm using the scroll wheel now to zoom in or to zoom out. And if you click and drag, you basically select the region, and if you release it, it zooms in on that. Note in this slide, it mentioned also that the press and hold with the left mouse button is to move or pan the graph, and the selecting a region in here is using the right mouse button there, yes. But it is actually different since the version 10.0 or 10.07. So on this version, I already have this new behavior. This new behavior means if I just do a left mouse button click, it does a selection. If I go back, if I do a right click, I see that I can move my graph. So that's moving, that's panning with the right click menu. I do also have the possibility to use the preview window at the bottom. So let me go to last 24 hours to reset again. So I can just simply use it, select the middle section, you could say, to move it, or I can actually select the side handles to make it smaller and basically zoom in, or make it wider again to actually zoom out. So that allows you to move in time and to actually zoom in and zoom out as well. As I mentioned, you can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and to zoom out, or click and drag to zoom in, or right click to pan in time. If you want the right click and the left and right mouse button to behave differently between the zoom and the panning, you can actually go to the user settings and change it over there. Now, you've probably noticed already that when zooming in, more detail is being added. That's actually where I can show you then that we have more detail and less detail, whether you're looking right now at the last 24 hours or something that is beyond the past month. I'm currently looking here at the last 24 hours. So if I zoom in and if I continue to zoom in, you will see that the graph shows more and more detail. Forgot to mention. So the dark blue line, that's the average, and the blue region or zone around it, that's the min-max. So actually, if I zoom in on this section, you will see that there is indeed some min-max and up to the point. if I zoom in, where I no longer see that zone with the min-max, that means that currently we're looking at real-time trending. This is the real-time behavior that the parameter did and the measurements we did. And if I would zoom in even more, we're actually looking at something now which is 10 seconds. So like every 5 seconds, we have a new value. Every 5 seconds, we have a new measurement. And if we start to zoom out, we will take those measurements and start averaging them and showing more an overall look. Now let's go to month to date. That's the last month. And let's, for instance, go back for a few months. And I'm here a few months back. And if I zoom in, it gives me more detail, but not anymore, not up to the point where I see that real time. It only shows me one value for every hour slot. That's the 1 hour time slot. If I go for week to date and I take a closer look at something which happened earlier this week, and if I zoom in, you will see that it actually has a window of every 5 minutes it shows details. So real time is for the last 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on your settings. Up to a week, up to 1 month, we have 5-minute time slots. Up to 1 year, we have 1 hour time slots. And that's being reflected in the trend graph that we see here when we zoom in. So zooming in, moving your trend graph over time. Now I briefly mentioned that prediction there. Well, that's actually quite interesting because it will indeed show me how that parameter will evolve over time. But be aware there is also a distinction between short-term, mid-term and long-term. Because the trend graph or the prediction will do it on a short-term basis, more accurate, looking in that context, but also on a longer term and a mid-term and a longer term. You can choose which one you want to show, but I would recommend to just leave it on auto because the auto will automatically adapt to your zoom level. A small note, there is a possibility that a warning sign is being indicated there. That is that there might be some predictions that are not able to be defined because maybe the parameter is too erratic and there is no real sense we can make out of it. And let me just show you an example. I'm gonna just quickly show it over here on my first Microsoft server. So you can see it's predicting this line already quite good, but I want to show you also something that is a little bit more complicated. Because this parameter is not just going to do a moving average or something like that. No, it is really taking a lot of variables into play to make models. Those analytics guys did quite some effort to make sure that we have the correct models with the correct behavior of parameters to have a very meaningful and very accurate prediction, basically. So here we see a parameter which is the power utilization of a building. It's last 24 hours, so we can see that in the morning it has been increasing and up to a level where we are now. And you can see that it actually predicts already some movement here and quite a big drop here around after 6 o'clock. So apparently after business hours, this is dropping rather drastically, you could say. I can move that so you can see that it's predicting actually already again in the morning, but that's only for like, let's say overnight it is doing the prediction. But if I will, that's a short term. But if I would do more starting to zoom out, you will notice that at some point it actually goes to the midterm, and we also have long-term prediction, where you can actually see that, well, we have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that's nicely predicting the working days. So it sees that seasonality. So if you have something like day-night behavior, but it even goes beyond that, because it's not only day-night it is detecting here, but you will notice that it actually doesn't do that for the next days anymore, and that's because it's Saturday, Sunday. So we do have that week behavior where we have the weekdays and you have the weekends. So weekdays, weekends. And let me see if I have some more. Do I have some long-term? No, I don't have long-term prediction. Let's leave it on auto. But you can already see that it actually nicely sees that behavior on a parameter. Short-term, mid-term, longer-term, different seasonalities are taken into account. So that's a very accurate and a very mature prediction that we have available in our DataMiner system. It has also been growing and matured over the many years we have been developing on that. Next to the trend prediction, I also want to mention something rather new. That's the pattern matching. The pattern matching allows you to select a specific part of your trend graph and to put a label or a tag on it to say like, okay, this is for instance, an event happening, something like a backup that was running in there, or a sports event that was starting in my system, or some maintenance that has been done. And that allows you to actually say, okay, this pattern, if you see that again somewhere in my trend graph, I want you to automatically label that as well, and maybe even generate an alarm on that. Because with the trend prediction as well, the objective is to generate alarms. We'll talk about that in the alarming. But actually to generate alarms when you are going to reach something tomorrow, when there is going to be a problem tomorrow. So that's proactive alarming. But the pattern matching allows you to immediately specify that an alarm should be generated whenever that pattern is being detected again. Let me show you. Maybe I can try it on this here to see if there will be some patterns that will reoccur. Note if you just click and drag, that's zooming in. So you have zoom in, zoom out that is available with the scroll wheel or with the selection. But if you I forgot to mention in the slides that you do have to press and hold your control key. Apologies. So I press and hold my control key, and then I do this selection, and then it doesn't zoom in if I leave my mouse. And actually it allows you to further fine tune it and to say like, okay, that's actually the pattern that I want to select here. You can actually still zoom in on it. You have these buttons that are appearing next to it. Or you can say like, okay, that's a work day. And optionally, you can generate an alarm whenever this is being detected again. So you can see this one was not a casual working day apparently, because it didn't have that same pattern again. But if it goes up, down, up, up, down, up, then it's really matching. This one is not complete here as well. So we had an interruption there. So you can see it nicely labels those different patterns that are being detected again. This is now not an example where I want to generate an alarm upon, so I didn't activate the alarm. But if you would like to do so, you select it and you can go back to the editing to change the label to potentially generate an alarm, or you can just delete it again and then it's removed again from your system. So pattern matching, where you can look for a certain pattern in your trend graph for that to appear again in the future. Now I've been mainly looking at single parameters, just drilling down into one parameter, but I can see more parameters in there and then combine basically multiple parameters, how they behave together over time, and see the relation between that. And that's not only within one element, but also across elements I can do so. How can you do that? Well, therefore you have to be in the bottom panel. This screenshot is taken from the bottom panel. You might need to open it up with the arrow on the right hand side, because by default it is collapsed. If you open that up, You can add a new parameter by using this Add Parameter button, or you can click on the plus sign to duplicate an existing parameter, and you can just click on the element or the parameter to change any of those fields. And there is actually a third option where you can just drag an element from your surveyor and drop it onto this trend graph, and it will automatically add that specific element. For each parameter that you add in a trend graph, you have the color coding, you have the where your mouse currently is located, the time, the min, the max, and the value, and also the current value of now, not from the trace at where your mouse is. The current value is also conveniently indicated there. Let's take a look at that. If I go back to my Microsoft server and I have my total processor loads, and I want to actually compare my total processor loads over time with something like memory, for instance. I need to do so by opening up that bottom panel there at the very bottom, clicking on that arrow. I only have a single parameter in there, so I can easily duplicate that and say like, okay, I'm going to add in there, for instance, the handles, let's say, and maybe also I'm going to add something like, do we have some physical memory usage, for instance. Show the trends. And now I will see 3 trend graphs together, where we can see the blue one, that's the total processor load. We already had that one. The little bit greenish thing is the total handles, and we have also in purple the physical memory utilization. So you can see how those evolve over time. If I want to add another Microsoft server in the play here, I can just drag and drop on there, and it will automatically add the Microsoft server 02, and I still need to select a parameter, and apparently there are no parameters activated on that one, so let's remove it again. Let's just take my power utilization that I had before, because I know there we definitely have one. The power active, show the trends, and we will see the power utilization also, and that's now in gray. Let me maybe remove some other ones. Show the trend. So that's how you can easily add new parameters onto your trend graph, and you can also just take them from other elements, or you can still click on there to move it to another element or to select another element. Okay, that's very powerful, very useful, and very convenient to do some troubleshooting and debugging. Now, a few more details that are available, or options, I should say, in the right-click menu. So here you can see the right-click menu that is shown here. The first items are just the same as the buttons on the upper right-hand side to change the zoom level. Last hour, last week, last month. It has some more options there. So there you can conveniently go to the last week, month, or date, or things like that. Next to that, we also have the curves, the trend lines that are being shown, some options on there, because sometimes you maybe want to change certain things, whether it needs to show the min-max. You have also some options whether it needs to share the same y-axis. Some things like that are available. The next thing that is available is the y-axis settings, and that's to define the range, because that's actually an interesting one. Let me just quickly go back to just my total processor loads. Or let's maybe go back to another one that is a little bit more changing over time. Well, actually, if I zoom in on a certain part, let's say over there, and if I then move my window, you will notice that sometimes, let me go for y-axis settings, let me go for auto. So normally by default it is on auto, and if you actually see that it only shows the trend graph now from 45 to 90%, but if I move it and I have a smaller value, then it goes from 0 to 90. And if I take the older values out, it jumps again now to 0 to 60. So it automatically adapts. That's the auto range of the y-axis. You can also put it on auto. On a range, a fixed range, and then basically you can specify a min and a max. I'm just going to leave it on the full range of the total processor load and put OK, and that gives you immediately a different perspective. So instead of looking at something which would be in the middle of the screen, you can actually see it's very low, and there it is higher. You see it in perspective of the full range of this parameter. So remember that y-axis settings that can come in handy. Next to that, we also have statistics. So if you want to take a closer look, last 24 hours, for instance, to the statistics, you do have the possibility to tweak the from and to timing, so which time slots you want to currently look at. But if once you apply that, if you want to change that, you can do so. You can immediately see the min, the max, the average, but also the mean and standard deviation. They are being visualized here with that color coding, a little bit the greenish line, and the mean deviation, that's the region over there in purple, and the standard deviation in gray. And you can also visualize that in a histogram where then it is being shown vertically. The average, the mean deviation, and the standard deviation. Okay. You can also print and copy those settings to the clipboard. But more interesting is the print and save image and copy clipboard in here, because if I'm looking at a trend graph and I quickly want to share that information with somebody else, or I want to store it or maybe use it in a document that I'm preparing somewhere, then I can use those options. You can print it, save the image as a PNG or a JPEG file on your computer, or just do a copy and paste it into an email or a Word document. Or you can also export the data into a CSV so that you can open it up in Excel, for instance, and start working with it with the raw data there. Small note, if I export to CSV, so I'm exporting the total processor load. You can say if you want to export the real-time 5-minute or 60-minute time slots, from which time till which time you want to export it. And then you can also have some options there. Line graph instead of block graph. If you go for a line graph, it will basically only export one. Instead of going for like a block line, where you can see the block line, it will only add 1 point in the middle here where my mouse is currently with that value, and not a value at the beginning and a value at the end, forcing Excel to draw a line. But no, then it will only in the middle have one dot, and it will be one line going up and down from one spot to another spot. That's the subtle difference of that export that I had there available. And I also have the ignore gaps if there would be any gaps, because maybe the device has been in timeout or it was paused, your element, then you can say to ignore those gaps in the exports. Otherwise, it would also export the gaps. Now, next to that export, I also want to mention the show most detailed. That's, let me take a look at last 24 hours. Yeah, in this case, actually, if I will zoom in the last 24 hours, maybe you just noticed when I was zooming in, that is not showing me more detail. It is stuck on that 5-minute time frame to only averaging of 5 minutes. That is because if I take a quick look at the template, there is no real-time activated. Only average data is being activated for this total processor load. Let me go to the other system I have here available, a demo system. If I, last 24 hours, if I zoom in here, we had more detail up to the real-time data. That is because the template also has trend real-time activated. But what I was going to say is, if I zoom out, you notice that this averaging is happening. Well, you do have the possibility to say like, show the most detailed data anyhow. That's the result. That's the line that is continuously going up and down. If I zoom in, you see that line. So we squeeze it, and basically you have a big block of data you have for the last 24 hours. Of course, we only have real-time data for 24 hours. So you notice that if you go beyond 24 hours, we have again averaging only there and no detailed data. So that's just an option on how you want to visualize this region here, the last 24 hours. Add to graph to dashboard, you can play around with that. We're not gonna focus on dashboards within this session here. Now, I've added some multiple parameters in that trend graph because I wanted to compare certain parameters together. But sometimes I want to do that on like a daily basis, or well, maybe not a daily basis, but on a regular basis, that I quickly want to check like a bunch of receive levels of a bunch of receivers, or a series of bit rates on specific ports. And basically I want to combine all those parameters and save it somehow in the system. That's what you can do with trend groups. So if you combine some parameters together into a trend graph, you can save that in a trend group so that you can easily recall that later on. So how can you do that? Well, at the bottom, you had the possibility to save it, and then it pops up in the trend groups. That's a panel which is available on the left-hand side of your trend graph. But sometimes you're combining parameters that are from different elements. So you not necessarily want to go to an element to access that. That's why we created a dedicated trending app to easily open up those trend groups. And I'll show you in a quick demo here as well. So let's say I want to combine my total processor load here with some other parameter. So I can duplicate my parameter again and, for instance, add that total handles next to that, show the trend. Just as a quick example, you could add some other parameter in there as well from another element, just to quickly add 3 graphs in there. Of course, I can do show min max, yes or no, these kind of options we just saw. But next to show trend, we also have the possibility to save your setup here, you could say. If you click Save As, you do have the possibility to save your trend group as, let's say, Bert test here. You can give it a name, but next to that name, you also need to specify whether this trend group is a private thing or if it's a public or a protected thing. A private thing means it's only going to be available for my user. I'm logged in as Bert van den Bergen, so it's only going to be available for me and I'll be able to update it. Or you can make it public, everybody will see it, everybody can use it, everybody can change it or mess it up. So that's the 2 extremes. You can also go for protected, which basically means like I created it and only I can change it. I manage the trend group, you could say. I'm the author and the only editor, but you can use it. Feel free to open it up, but don't mess around with it. So that's what you can do with it. I'll just keep it private here, not to interfere with some other people using the system. I save it. So now it is available in the trend groups. By default, the trend groups here on the left-hand side, that is collapsed. So you need to open it up to see it. And you can see that my private group is here. There are some other read-only groups that I have access to and some shared groups. The read-only ones, I cannot change it, but somebody made those protected. And the shared groups, that's open in the public. Everybody can see and change them as well. So if I just go back tomorrow to this system here, and I want to again take a look at my trend graphs that I combined together in a trend group, I have two options. Either I go for opening an element, going to one of the parameters, doesn't really matter which one, go to the trending, open up the trend groups, and then say like, okay, let's load the BERT tests. And I have it again. But there is also that trending app. So let me close it again. If tomorrow I log into my system and I want to easily access the trend group again, I can go to apps, and I have that. I have a lot of apps here. I have that trending app available. I just open up the trend graph, the trending app. By default, this panel is open, and I can see all of my private trend groups that I created, and the public and the protected ones as well. Just one click and it immediately loads that trend group again. So that's quite convenient to immediately have that trend group again available with just a few clicks away. The trend group, definitely something to take a closer look at and to play around with. You can also add trend groups right from the trending app by just creating a new group here or deleting a group. So you don't necessarily have to start from an element, but that's kind of convenient, I would say, to do it from an element. Okay, to finalize this module, I still have a word on reports, histogram, and examples. Will only take a minute. The reports, we already saw a little bit of the reports when looking at the data display in the data display module. And let me go back to my other system. So basically, if you drill down into a parameter, you end up on the trending graph if there is trending available, but you can also navigate to the details page. That includes some report graphs with how many alarms this parameter, not this element, but this parameter has generated in the last 24 hours or last week or last month. You can choose there. Let's go for last week. And then I have some criticals. And you can also export that to Excel, and you can also see it in time, because on the left-hand side, that's the number of alarms I generated. I have generated hundreds of alarms in the last week, but it was only a fraction of the time an alarm. So I should revisit my alarm template here, because maybe I need to activate some hysteresis. There's probably some short toggling alarms whenever it spikes. And I can fix that with hysteresis, putting a delay on there. Next to the details with some reports, I also have the histogram. So the histogram allows you to take a look at your parameter, not how it evolves over time, but actually taking a look on how often it was on a certain percentage, in this case, on a certain value. So I see that in the last 24 hours, that my parameter has most often been between 0 and 10% CPU utilization, and also a part of the time it has been above 50%. So that's now a little bit maybe because of my spike I had in there. Let me go for the other system and take a closer look at an example here on the histogram. Let me go back to my total processor loads and take a look at the histogram. Here you see more that hose curve that I was expecting. It's not very popular to be at a very low CPU load, then it increases, and that's the most popular CPU load is around 10%, then it goes down, and then we have a load here, and then going up again. So that's a typical example that you can see with your histogram. Note the histogram, if you open up the bottom panel, you can define the window more accurate as well, and you can specify the buckets, the size of the buckets, how big they are. So to quickly show you, you can say like, okay, no automatic intervals, but let's go with an interval width of 5%, for instance, then you have bigger blocks, things like that. So you can really customize that histogram as well. Now, to wrap it up, some examples. We already saw some examples on our demo systems and DCP DMA, but I just want to indicate here that the history perspective brings a lot of value. If I see a parameter that is in alarm, the first thing I do, I open up the trend graph because I want to see how I got into this situation. Was it like slowly decreasing or degrading the signal level and suddenly I'm hitting the threshold, or was it just at one point it spikes up? That's valuable information to know, because if it was degrading, maybe I need to go back further in time to know the root cause of the problem that I'm currently investigating. So that's very valuable. The relation between different parameters, of course, like an azimuth and elevation together with a tracking signal level, the average QAM level with some spikes in there as well, some carrier level with some drops here. Here we have the temperature, that's the purple line going up. The temperature goes up, goes up, goes up because the heater is on. When the temperature is high enough, the heater turns off. So that's a discrete and on-off. And then the temperature drops again, and then the heater turns on again. So you can nicely see that relation here as well. Upstream, downstream utilization, day-night behavior of human beings. Human beings are getting up in the morning, they are using more upstream and downstream, they are going to bed again, so you can see that day-night behavior nicely in there. CPE box is out of service, some people are plugging out their boxes, so you can see some online, offline, or the number of offline devices increasing overnight and then decreasing again. So that's the day-night behavior again. And here you see a big outage, that's a clear outage that is happening here, but some smaller ones as well. Dynamic alarming can actually track those smaller ones as well. Anyhow, that was a little bit of you could say an introduction on the trending to get you acquainted with the module, to learn a little or to explain you a little bit more about how to use it, the zooming, the panning, the preview that you have at the bottom to navigate around, but also the trend prediction, how that comes in to play with the pattern matching also. All the goodies that are in the right click menu to do a little bit of tweaking of the UI or to copy your trend graph into an email, but also then of course combining several parameters together into one trend graph, not only within an element but also across different elements, and potentially saving that as a trend group to easily pull that up again tomorrow or the day after. And I wrapped it up with some reports and histogram, which might also come in handy here or there. So I hope that you see that this is a very valuable module. So that is definitely worth checking it out again. There are some more videos also on Dojo on certain specific topics within the trend prediction, for instance. So you can also check out on those. Next module will be the cube sidebar. Let's check out that next video as well. See you then.